I remember you challenging people in the room to think about the street they live on and how many people on that street that they knew, and to take a cart and draw the houses and write the names into those houses. And you challenged the members of your community to go out and meet those that they didn't know.
Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. So it is kind of weird when Christians talk about how much they love God, but they have no idea who their neighbors are. You're listening to The Glass House, a podcast that focuses on ministry leaders and their spouses.
Ben and I have lived in that glass house for most of our married lives, and it's important to us that we bring you tools that we wish we had. But not only that, we would love to hear from you. Email us at president@lifeway.com. We would love to hear your stories from the glass house.
We'd also like your recommendations on what you want to hear. The podcast is for you, and we want to serve you best.
Recently, Ben and I and our kids got to go back to Colorado, and there are a lot of special relationships there. So for the glass house, we decided to sit down with our neighbors, Neil and Christy, or our former neighbors, Neil and Christy. We got to talk with them and ask them what it was like to have a pastor's family move onto the street. I think sometimes we don't often understand or even think about how unchurched people perceive us. And I think we were surprised to hear some of the things that happened on the street when we moved in. And Neil and Christy are such good friends with us that they were gracious enough to share with us just kind of some of the perceived ideas when we were moving onto the street.
I'm really thankful we're talking about this subject because Lifeway Research has just unveiled a massive study on the pastor's greatest needs. And 44 needs were identified by pastors, but one of the biggest things that came out was that 76% of pastors surveyed said their churches are struggling to connect with unchurched people. 76%. 3 out of 4 pastors are saying, I'm not sure that my people have any clue on how to build relationships with those who don't go to our church. This episode is going to challenge, encourage, and I think simplify what it means to be a good neighbor and to build relationships with the people that God's placed all around us.
So Neil grew up in Colorado. He doesn't have a background in the church, so he loves nature, loves being outdoors. Christy grew up with a little bit of a Catholic background, but has not been a part of the Catholic belief system since probably she was 18 years old. She grew up in Pennsylvania. So it was a fun experience being neighbors with them and just the transition of becoming friends with them when we moved.
We set up the podcast equipment in their kitchen, having no idea if they would feel the freedom to be honest. We're excited for you to hear them describe what the journey was like for them to become pretty close friends with Christians. It's really fun to have this conversation with the two of you because you were here when we moved onto the street and all of the things that were being said about what's going to happen when these church planter people show up. So could you guys just maybe talk for a second about that? Like, what did you think when you heard that we were on the street? We were coming on the street.
It was a little bit unsure, as I'd never heard of church planting before you guys had moved in, so I wasn't quite sure what to expect. In thinking about it, I was a little taken aback because Colorado is not, generally speaking, what I would consider a churchy state. And to have somebody moving here to plant or start a new church was ultimately uncommon.
Well, and you didn't have a category for that.
No.
Like you'd never heard of that.
No.
Was there any part of you of like, why are they coming here? Like, do they think we're like the craziest people on the planet that need God more than anybody else? Like, why here?
As somebody who likes to get to know people before I place any type of judgment, I was excited about the opportunity to meet some new people.
And Chrissy, how about you? Like, we had an encounter. We were looking for a house, and I told Lindley, I was like, I'm going to go over to that lady right there and find out if this is a fun street to live on. I'm just going to ask her. And of course, Lindley tried to talk me out of it. Don't say anything to her.
I was like, don't bother her. She's busy. She's doing something.
So we walked up to you that fateful day.
We didn't. You did.
You actually were busy that day.
I was busy.
And what did you think about us?
You were very outgoing.
Okay.
You immediately came over. You had your hand out. Hey, it's Ben Mandrell. Nice to meet you. We're thinking about buying this house. It makes you feel comfortable, welcome. And so I immediately felt at ease and I answered whatever questions you had.
Well, we live in a day when people judge each other a lot. I mean, this isn't just a religious problem. It's just people like make preconceived judgments about other people without even getting to know them. Lindley and I have noticed, like, sometimes Christians are judged. Like, people decide what they think about a Christian person before they even get, and sometimes it's the other way around. Did you guys struggle with judgmental? Like, did you feel like you had already formed in your mind what we would be like before we got here because of previous experience with Christians? Was there any of that?
Yeah, unfortunately, I guess I have the stereotypical thought in my head of very Southern, very preachy almost, or that kind of a thing. And upon meeting you guys, you were none of those things, which was very comforting. And you never pushed anything religious on us. You just wanted to be friends first and get to know people, which I think we specifically, but other people very much so appreciated, so that we got to have a better understanding.
Before we got here, we were told of some things that people had said as, kind of concern of coming in, taking the fun off the street, those kind of things. Do you recall that? Were you a part of any of those conversations, and not even participating, but just hearing them?
I certainly did. And I heard some very negative feelings about, people from the South coming here to plant a church. And it made some people very uncomfortable. And in thinking back about it, the South is very notorious for being very churchy. And Colorado is almost opposite of that. I think that for me, it was, again, a wait and see what these people are all about. But as I remember early on in the conversations, part of my celebration of God and my celebration of church was to be outside, to be skiing, to be riding my mountain bike, to be outside. And I think that there were others on the street that had cast judgment to say, hey, we've got these people that are coming in for church. We need to band together against them and make them feel uncomfortable so that they'll move.
Was that discussed? I mean, not necessarily outright like that, but kind of that was the feeling.
There was definitely some folks on the street that were very opposed to having a pastor and a church planter coming to the street.
I've tried to give those people the benefit of the doubt because I think what was going through their head was part of the reason we moved to Colorado is to be able to live the way we want to live. The state is kind of known for that, like, you be you kind of behavior. And they're going to come here and try to make us into them or convert us to their thinking or their lifestyle. And so one of the things we tried to do early on was to make it clear was we were here to be your friends first and not try to win you to our side of the belief system, even though we would love that. And you guys did, of all of our neighbors, I think, really got involved at Storyline and really got connected at Storyline. And we were excited to see that. But even if you hadn't, we had already decided that we were going to be your friends either way. And so I think it felt like our relationship was bigger than just your involvement in our church. Did you guys feel that way?
I personally did. I mean, you guys took the time to get to know us. We did things as families. We took the kids and did things together. And I think that's the best thing you guys could have done coming here. I know that's who you are, but it really benefited our family for sure and others on the street. I think the people that were apprehensive, we'll say, about you guys coming on the street, I think maybe that was some of their insecurities in not knowing, in the unknown. And I think the way that you guys came in and taught my family about Christianity was the biggest blessing that could have been for my kids, and I would say us as well.
Well, and I think to add to what Christy just commented about is there was an instant connection between your youngest and our youngest in the sons. And the fact that they were playing together reminded me that people are people and boys will be boys. And that meant a lot just to see that connection. But I also think that there were two other things that your family did that really gave an open attitude to what you're trying to do and bring to this part of the state.
I'm really interested to hear what you're about to say. I've never heard you guys talk about this. So
two things.
Yeah.
First thing, you were very open about being part of the community and improving the community more than you were about bringing people to Storyline Fellowship. Whether that was a secondary motive. I really felt that you wanted to be a part of the community, from Easter egg hunts at Westwoods Park to family gatherings to even sitting under the tree when we would have the kids running around on the street and the adults would get together under the tree and have conversations about anything but religion. You really wanted to be a part of the community. And I think that the second thing is you were very quick to recognize that people in Colorado aren't going to dedicate a Sunday to spend an hour with you. You recognize that people on Sundays are going to be out hiking or camping or four-wheeling or skiing or mountain biking or just getting outside. And you were very open about being part of Storyline Fellowship wasn't about being inside of a building. It was being part of a community.
We learned early on that if the scorecard is how many people can we squeeze in a room on a Sunday morning, we were going to redo the scorecard. Because how can we compete with that out there? I mean, people move here to experience those mountains, and very few Colorado people say, on Sunday morning, I hope I'm sitting in a room. So
Inside with no windows.
yes. So we began to understand that people would come often. They just wouldn't come every week. Like, they were going to have their weekends in the mountains, and it wouldn't ever benefit the relationship for us to judge them for that or make them feel like they were bad people because they weren't there on Sunday. Let's say Lindley and I started another church, and we invited you to come, and we were trying to teach our church how to be good neighbors. And we asked you to say, hey, tell them some things, like if they moved in your neighborhood, they could do to build relationships with you, and it wouldn't feel weird. What would be some of the things you would say to them of like, hey, here's how to relate to us in a way that's not awkward or uncomfortable? Can you think of some little things, like basic things they might do to become your friends without having to cross that barrier?
I guess I would say that the primary thing would be you guys were asked a lot of questions. You went the route that anybody was wanting to talk about. You just asked prompting questions and continued down that route rather than steering them down a route that you may have predetermined.
So it didn't feel like we were trying to manipulate you to a certain answer. We were just like genuinely asking open-ended questions.
Yes, as I feel like that may have been a preconceived idea that somebody would have thought, oh, well, we'll eventually get them to turn and think this way or talk about this or open up about this. I remember Lindley and I were hiking the first time we first actually talked about religion, and it was a good conversation because we were out in nature and it felt very natural, and she didn't bring it up. I'm certain that I did at some point, or maybe my mom was even there. Who knows? But I would say, yeah, you let conversation go. Neil was accurate when he was talking about the community. You were very involved in the community. You involved the kids. I think that's a huge thing. Getting the kids involved and playing games and interacting and having a good time with them.
I mean, I think it was important for us for people to never feel manipulated or like a bait and switch. I mean, that's a big deal in Colorado, and I know it is in other states, of course, of just authenticity. And so with everything we did, we didn't want it to be like, hey, can you come over? And then when you're over here, we're going to ask you how we can pray for you, or, something like that. And I think even we had you guys over for dinner several times, and we wouldn't pray before the meals because we just thought, we don't know how you feel about that yet. And so we knew, like, as a family, like, Lord bless this food, but we didn't have to do that in front of you guys until you felt comfortable. And then we did begin praying with you guys, and it was fine.
Let's pause right here and unpack this a little bit. The no agenda item that we just talked through with them is so important to relationship building in this environment.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, non-religious people are super smart. Like, just like when I know somebody wants to have coffee with me because they really want me to do something for them, I think people know, like when Christians say, hey, let's get together, and really what I want to do is get you to believe what I believe.
Well, I think I would clarify. I think they're discerning. I want to clarify that, unchurched, non-religious people are discerning, and they feel when they're being manipulated into a situation.
Right. And so we said from the very beginning, like we just talked about, like, we're going to love these people because God put them on our street, and we're called to engage, invest, and encourage as many of these people as possible. And never the goal was said or stated or understood to be, and someday we're going to put them in the baptistry at Storyline and show them off as trophies of what we've been able to pull off here.
Well, we've talked about this on the show before, but in case you haven't heard us quoted, one of the things that was really important to us was to say, we invite people into our lives and not a location. And so when we began this journey in Colorado, we really had no hidden agenda. And our desire to be friends with Neil and Christy was simply because we liked them. And we had things in common, and we had children in common, and we were at the same school, and we lived beside each other. And so there was nothing in my mind that says, I'm going to invite Christy to go hiking so that maybe Christy will come to church with me. And I mean, I do, and she knows this. We've had so many honest conversations. We did get to a point to where I said, hey, Christy, we are such good friends. It would really honor me if you would come to church and just see what we're doing. And, because you're my friend, I would love it if you would come see what I do, because she knew I was the director of kids ministry. And she did. And she came because she was my friend and she wanted to honor me. And so, there was no hidden agenda there. And so I didn't invite her to a thing because I had any sort of manipulative ideas in my mind. I invited her proactively saying, because I love you and you love me, would you come to this with me?
And I think we had to get to the point where we could admit that we have as much to learn from Neil and Christy as they have to learn from us, that relationships are a two-way street. And that's the beauty of becoming friends with people, is that, you get to exchange wisdom and talk about things that matter. And that really happened with Neil and Christy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think adding to the conversation, I think that one of the most impactful sermons that I remember, and I think this holds true for a pastor that wants to become part of a community, is your sermon about being neighborly. And I remember you challenging people in the room to think about the street they live on and how many people on that street that they knew, and to take a cart and draw the houses and write the names into those houses. And you challenged the members of your community to go out and meet those that they didn't know. And it wasn't going there with a message, it was going there to learn. Hi, my name is Neil. What is your name? I live on this part of the street. What are your wife and kids' names? What are your husband and kids' names? But to be neighborly. And ultimately that, I think, promotes community. I think that promotes being friendly. And I think that it breaks down some barriers that oftentimes, I think, live within a particular street. But even within the Storyline Church, you encourage that of others. You encourage people to go out into the foyer and have conversations with people they didn't know. And I think that we are very drawn to those that we're comfortable with, and to challenge us to be neighborly with those that we don't know. I think it's a way that somebody that's getting into ministry, getting into the church life, could really open some doors.
We talk about sometimes you have to belong before you believe. Feel like you belong somewhere before you're even able to process the belief system. And I think that is true. I feel accepted and loved by this group of people, even if I'm still processing the message. Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. So it is kind of weird when Christians talk about how much they love God, but they have no idea who their neighbors are.
I love Neil. One of my favorite moments in life in ministry was the first time Neil heard me preach. He came over, knocked on the door. I opened the door. He said, hey, I really liked your presentation today.
Because Neil's in sales.
Yeah.
So speaking in front of people is a presentation. It's not a sermon.
With slides.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And he was so encouraging to say, hey, it really challenged me and made me think about my life in some different ways. And then other times he would make statements like, hey, when I listen to you speak, it makes me want to be a better person. And it always meant so much to me that I was communicating in such a way that Neil could not only understand, but also appreciate the Christian faith. And it gave us a lot of room for discussion. I mean, Neil went through a hard time when he lost his job, and we were able to have some really in-depth conversations about calling and, why God puts us on the planet. And that relationship began to grow, and it was fun to go deeper with Neil. Neil mentions the message that I preached on neighboring. The truth is there were a bunch of those. We tried every year to do either a sermon or a series of sermons on how to better connect with the people God has placed all around you. And so that was a passion point for us while we were church planners especially. And there's 5 good neighbor goals that we wrote down For those of you who are listening, maybe you're looking for some fresh ideas on how to connect with your neighbors. Here's some things that we discovered along the way.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one would be ask for advice or for help on a project. So I'm not handy. Neil is super handy.
And Christy.
Amazing with tools.
Mm-hmm.
And it was often that I would call Neil and be like, hey, I have no idea how to deal with this pipe issue. Can you come over and look at it? Or I don't know how to turn my sprinkler system on every year. And just admitting that you need help endears you to people. And it really helped with them.
Well, I think it helps with anybody. I do believe that Christians can have this persona that we don't need help because we have the Lord. And while that's true, we also do need help on the earth with some things. And so...
Because so far the Lord hasn't made me handy.
No, still not.
Let's keep praying.
So, for us to be humble and say, we just can't do this. Can you help us out? I mean, it makes them feel like, great, they are human. They don't think they're these superhuman, snobby Christians that have everything together. And so I think that was a piece of our friendship that endeared them to us.
Right. Number 2.
So, I mean, it's so simple. Show an interest in their kids or their pets. I mean, it was an easy connection for Christy and I to be together a lot because we have children similar in age. But even if they weren't, to show an interest in their kids is a big deal. I think we talked to them a little bit about how at one point their son Caden was pretty seriously injured in a playground accident. And our whole family went over that afternoon. We didn't know them super well at that point. It was pretty early on in the friendship. And just had a little bag of treats for him to relax with. And that is so simple. I mean, this is not an idea that every person in the world could not do, but it meant a lot to them because we just said, hey, we are so sorry and we care. And what can we do to help you? And it created another on-ramp to have a piece of real estate in their life.
And what's crazy about Colorado is people love their pets as much as their children.
They do indeed. Actually, we were more judged for our bad, poorly behaved dog than we were our children.
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, getting down on the ground and petting someone's dog in Colorado means a lot to them. So find ways to honor what's important to them. Number 3, have them over to your house and be intentional with conversation around the table. We did this all the time. We had a conversation cube. It was very simple. You've seen these at stores. They just a whole list of fun questions. So we'd have all the adults and the kids at the table. I would be the MC because I enjoyed that. And everybody would get a question that they had to answer. And it might be as simple as, what's your favorite thing to eat at Thanksgiving? Mm-hmm. And we found that when adults and kids can have a conversation together, it's unique and refreshing.
Actually, we would say at the beginning of the conversation, hey, or the beginning of the dinner, we're going to have one big conversation. We're not going to separate kids from adults. And honestly, we were doing that a little bit for our own children's benefit to learn how to ask questions. We think it's a little bit of a lost art that people don't know how to ask questions and they don't even know how to ask a follow-up question. And so with this question cube, we'd ask a question and then we would even beforehand tell our kids, hey, if you can piggyback off that question and ask them a second one that has nothing to do with yourself, do that. Don't say, if they had a question and they answered it that revolved around them, don't say, I like that too, or don't one-up them.
Yep.
Say, tell me about when you began that or something to get them talking. And I think that made our neighbors or just different people we had in the household feel special because it wasn't like, hey, come over to our house so that we can tell you all about us and our journey and what we're doing at the church. Like that really never got brought up.
Once you've been in someone's house, had dinner with them, the relationship's different forever. Mm-hmm. So we just try to do that. Number 4 was just celebrating with them.
Right. I mean, just notice the big moments that happen in their life.
Graduations or birthday parties or just things that are celebratory. Even like certain holidays, we'd say, hey, why don't we all make a meal and get together? And
well, we did Christmas with our neighbors. I mean, we did Christmas on Russell Court. And because we... not being from Colorado, but being in church ministry, there was always a Christmas Eve service and you couldn't get home. And so Christmas morning, we numerous years had a big Christmas brunch with everyone on the street. That was really so special. But even, celebratory almost sounds like all the positive things, but the grieving and the sad things also need to be acknowledged because that's where you can go in and say something there was a family 2 doors down from us who are unchurched, unreligious. They were nice to us and very accepting. Well, they had some friends in town that had a situation with a child that he
was in a terrible accident on the mountain skiing.
Yeah, and the wife came up to our door and said, "Ben, you're the only person we know right with the Lord. Can you come pray for this child?" And that was a big moment for us to go down there and be able to minister to that family and organize some meals to be brought to them while they were there, because we did have families on the street who were also church going. There was a mixture, and so we were able to say to them, "Hey, help us bless this family."
Last thing we would say is just recognize those who really want a relationship with you and those who hold you at arm's length. Like, not everybody needs or wants a relationship with you as a Christian or as a neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
You would create like little soap bottles that we would go and give as a family, to every neighbor.
Actually, I wouldn't create them. I would buy them.
Yeah.
I wouldn't make them.
You're a great soap maker.
I'm not making my own soap at home.
I love when you make your homemade soap. Anyway, you know what I'm saying. We would do gifts, and then we would kind of wait and see who responded.
We would put a card on it that had our information on it that just said, we're Ben and Lindley. We moved in at blank address, and, we're looking forward to getting to know you, kind of thing. And then it would be interesting, the ones that would respond and then which ones wouldn't. And sometimes people just want to be more reserved and quiet. And that was okay. We needed to be kind to them, but also respect their boundaries.
So those are some of the things we did to try to be good neighbors. Common sense is not common practice. Those were common sense items, but maybe they helped spur you along, give you an idea on how you can better connect with your neighbors.
Let me ask you guys some questions, and you tell me if this would have been weird. Okay? I've thought about this. Like, once we established a friendship, obviously not in the first week, like, if you had been going through a hard thing, would it have felt weird if I said, "Hey, could we pray for you guys?" Would it have felt weird for you to sit there while I prayed out loud? And be honest, would that feel weird?
Early on, yeah, absolutely.
At what point would it stop being weird? Or would it always feel uncomfortable for you?
No, I would say after, the way we started was the kids went to camp. We did Uncle Ben's Bible time. We started slowly, I guess. But I would say maybe after we started regularly attending weekly services.
Yeah. At what point, or would it have been weird if I had said, okay, I'm going to ask this to you, Neil. Let's say you and I were outside and we were just hanging out and sitting in the chairs talking, and I'd said, "Hey, do you mind if I share like my spiritual story with you? Like how I've come to believe what I believe." Would that have felt weird to you, or would you have been like, "Yeah, tell me"?
I think if that would have been a conversation within the first couple of weeks, it would have been very awkward and uncomfortable, and it would have probably deterred me from spending more time under the tree. But after we started getting to know each other as people, I would have welcomed that, because it would have allowed me to better understand you as an individual, you as a person, and where you got your religious roots. But I think early on in the relationship, when we didn't know much about each other, it would have been pretty awkward. But in hindsight, if we were sitting under the tree and it was you and I just hanging out and you opened with that, I would have welcomed that information, because it would have given me a better understanding as to why you moved to Colorado to plant a church.
Gives you context to my life.
Absolutely.
That's really interesting. So there is this point, and it's hard to define in relationships, where both people feel safe, right? Where like I feel safe, where I can really share some deep things and it's not weird for you or weird for me. And I think maybe we don't always know where that line is.
Maybe the initial conversation is not the best time.
Or maybe the second or third.
Maybe that's accurate.
And I think there's no set standard of 1 week, 2 week, 3 week. I mean, I think it's just timing and the amount of, I think you have to have in-depth conversations beforehand of just, like you said, getting to know even your other story of, your family, or just different things that have gone on in your life before you can get straight to okay, now tell me your spiritual journey.
If you came under the tree and started pushing that right out of the gate, well, wait a minute, I'm not really there. I want to talk about other things. I want to know you, Ben, the person, before I get into the depth of how you became Ben, the pastor.
When Neil says that he wanted to know me as a person before I was a pastor, that's really impactful to me, because sometimes as pastors, we forget that we're human beings first, that we were a person before we were ever called pastor, that there are things about us that people want to know apart from what we do. And what Neil reminds me of is just the importance of building trust that comes through building memories together. And so, yeah, we would do things on the street together that allowed us to get to know one another. I initiated a book club with 4 or 5 guys in the street. They liked sitting around a fire pit. I said, hey, why don't we all read a book together? You guys pick the book. And so they picked Lone Survivor, and they like to read war books. So it was amazing how the Lone Survivor book has so many themes in it about survival and faith. And we would sit around the fire and just talk about what that book said and meant. And through those conversations over time, just deeper things naturally came up instead of having to force the issue. And those guys taught me so much about just allowing myself to be human in their presence.
We always said in our home that the gospel is conversational. And so we felt like it was not necessary to be confrontational with our neighbors and friends, that the conversation was going to come up, and they knew what we did. And so if we came to a place of trust in the relationship, the conversation was naturally going to happen of asking, so what do you believe about God? They were going to ask us that. And we were going to be able to reciprocate and say, what do you believe about God or who God is? And so I think that we just relied on that. We trusted the Lord to bring those conversations before us instead of trying to force it.
And I think we always were curious about their history. Like I remember with some of our neighbors, we would just say things like, hey, you guys see us go to church every Sunday. What's your background with church? Have you guys ever done the church thing? And then just see what they say. Because everybody has a story about religion or church or God. It's just a matter of figuring out what's happened in their life, what shaped their view of the church and God, and becoming more conversant with who they are and what shaped them.
Well, we're about to finish up. I want to say something. We have missed Storyline. We have missed it greatly. But we've missed you all even more. Having like neighbors that are like family. Like planting a church was awesome, but planning our lives next to you guys was even more awesome. So thanks for being some of the bearers of our best memories and vacations together, and Neil on a walkie-talkie and us talking nonsense all the way through Mount Rushmore. Doing life with you two has been an absolute joy.
And now we're all crying, and Christy hates to cry.
Yes.
So we're glad this is not a video podcast.
That's right. Well, thanks for being on the show. Anything else that you want to say? Go ahead, Neil.
No, I was just going to say, and I think that the friendship that formed is long lasting. It didn't disappear when you moved. And I think that friendships that are formed for whatever those reasons, that can navigate the waters across miles, are the true friendships that you want to take with you. And it all started when you guys moved to Colorado and wanted to plant a church.
One of my favorite stories in the Bible is when Jesus died. One of the men that came to bury his body was named Nicodemus. And Nicodemus had not been a follower of Jesus. And it teaches us that Jesus meant a lot to him, even though Nicodemus wasn't part of his church, so to speak. And I've shared this, like one of my dreams in my life is that when my last day is done and they put my body into the ground, that there would be some people around my casket who knew me deeply and loved me deeply and didn't go to my church. And they knew that I loved them and I would always love them, even if they never became Christians or never came to the church I pastored. And so I feel like what we really love the most about being a part of the local church is the people, both inside and out, that we get to minister to and love. And you guys have been so special to us.
Thank you so much for listening. If you're enjoying the podcast, would you consider leaving us a rating or a review wherever you listen to the show? It gives us insight into what you like, and it helps others find the show as well.
As you've listened today, we hope something has stood out to you that you'd like to share with a friend. Would you share this episode with them and boost the reach of the ministry? We appreciate you helping us get the conversations out into the world.
The Glass House is hosted by Lifeway, produced and edited by Angie Elkins Media, original music by Robert Elkins, sound engineering by Dale Sandberg, and artwork by Cameron Spooner.